Hello everyone. This is a series of chalk and talk presentations. The whole idea of this is that we can then appeal to people that might have learned NLP, people that might be coaches, there could be therapists out there that are interested in another approach that might add to your skill set. I can speak to you as a master trainer of NLP, and I can say that the system that is Spectrum Transition Coaching is like nothing else. And of course, these are just component parts of Spectrum. Today I'm going to present attitude, and the reason that I want to do that is that when I was in the military, what really used to drive me insane was when people would come up and say, well, we're getting rid of this person because they've got a bad attitude. And then I would ask them to tell me how they were measuring that. And the problem that I had was they could never tell me that. So for me, if you're going to make a statement, it's really important that you can prove the statement factually and take your opinion out of something. And more importantly, what are the component parts of attitude? Certainly in the military, we had a great system for training behaviors. So we had a great behavioral mechanism for training. We also had a great thinking model. So we had a great cognitive model. The thing that seemed to be missing, and certainly after a year and a half of traveling around the UK, looking at lots of the different centres and mental health organisations, I came to the conclusion that the bit that was missing was the emotional piece. Because when people were struggling, it was always emotional. And so therefore, this is the affective domain of learning. And there was nothing really that I could see that when someone started to struggle, we had any way of supporting them. And of course, this is why we turn to attitude. Because if you look at performance as a model, performance has three main components. The first one being knowledge. Knowledge, if we define it, is the ability to recall facts and data to achieve something. We also have skill. And skill is the ability to carry out tasks to achieve that same goal. And of course, the most misunderstood is attitude. I was once told that your attitude determines your altitude. I totally get that. But attitude isn't everything. If you require great levels of knowledge and skill, then it does take a great attitude to achieve those. But equally, there might be some limitations to achieving those, based on the personality profile of the person that wants to learn. Now, of course, we never set out any limits when we do any of these things, because we're just literally supporting our coachees through whatever journey they want to achieve. However, if these are the three component parts of performance that make the difference, we can see knowledge, we can measure it through tests. We can see skill, we can measure that through tests. But the most misunderstood is the attitudinal component. Because in reality, I work on a premise that no one ever sets out to fail. Something happens along the way, and quite often it's outside of the awareness of the performer. And so attitude was the most interesting element of performance for me. Because I met lots of people that could do things, and having introduced performance coaching to the British Army in 2003 via another organisation, what became apparent was that performance coaching worked for about 60% of the people that we were engaging with, that were light enough to achieve the goals that they set. It didn't work for the other 40% because there was something in their psyche, something in their unconscious that was stopping them from achieving this and getting them to repeat all patterns when they least wanted to. And there's many versions of those patterns, but essentially, the bit that I was interested in was the attitudinal element, because I found through a lot of the things that I looked at during the year and a half that I was looking was that we didn't have a way of supporting someone emotionally when they started to struggle. And everything we do comes from our emotions. It's driven by our emotions. It might be initiated by a cognitive trigger, something we see, hear, feel, smell or taste, but essentially it's the emotions that determine the resultant behavior. So the key thing is that when we look at this model, it's quite an interesting model on a number of levels, because when people used to say to me, well, he's got a bad attitude, I thought, well, that's a judgment call, really, because I don't know what a good attitude looks like. Is a good attitude something that allows you to achieve something, and a bad attitude that doesn't? See, for me, that doesn't add up. So what I did was I looked at the work of Robert Dilts, and he had a great model that talked about all the levels of neurology. And it really resonated with me, because as I start to explain this model on the board, you'll see where this fits in. And I'll show you why making judgment calls on performance are not really much use to you. I mean, let's face it, if you go into the world of NLP or you go into the world of performance, you soon start to realize that the way we often describe other things is more about us than it is about the thing we're describing if we're not measuring it. So getting out of the world of what we would call projection is really important. Ownership is the first step in any journey. You can't have ownership without awareness. And so we understand that those are all fundamental elements of you even exploring this as a model. And attitude is the least explored because it is the most complex. You can't see it. There's lots of things that go on at the level of the performer in their mind that if we didn't have the skills to ask the questions, we might never find out. So if we look at the component parts of attitude, we start with our values. And our values really is the domain of our emotions. This is where we hold our emotions. And it's worth remembering that values provide the upfront motivation to do something. And then when we've done it, they provide the after the fact evaluation to let us know how it went. So if I think, right, okay, it's a lovely day, I'm going to go kayaking today, it might be that my motivation to do it is initiated by a belief because it's a nice day, and equally the motivation to do it is because kayaking gives me some sort of feedback. It gives me some sort of energetic feedback or just enjoyment. So my values might drive that behavior. It's my beliefs that initiate it, because beliefs are switches. So values provide the juice, but beliefs provide the switches. Beliefs tend to be I am not statements. So when somebody starts to say I can, I can't, any excuse is generally connected to a limiting belief. And so they are generally I am not statements connected to identity. But essentially they're the switches for everything that we do. We also have potentially internal conflicts. And of course, when these are initiated, they have an impact. And I'm going to walk you through a whole process and show you how these work in a moment. We draw a line underneath here because these are the things that we cannot see. It's almost like if you can imagine an iceberg in the sea. The tip of the iceberg is what you see. And of course, we can see someone use their knowledge. We can measure that. We can also see and witness someone use their skill. We can measure that. We can also see the behaviors that they produce. So this is the visible tip of the iceberg. What we can't see is what goes on underneath. We can't see the part of the iceberg that's hidden. And that lies in this part of our experience and our nervous system. We can also see the results. We can measure the results. So someone once said to me, you can't possibly measure an attitude. Well, I disagree with that, and I'm going to show you how I measure attitudes, because this is an adaptation of one of Dilts' models. And it's an amazing model, actually, because I've even used this to do a training needs analysis. If you think about it, we are all elements of these, and equally companies are the same. Whatever applies to one can apply to many. So the first thing we do if we really want to measure our attitude is we set a goal. Now, the moment we set a goal, Because of the way the unconscious works, the moment we set a goal and we start to take steps, what we then should do is pay attention to what's going on at the level of mind. And one of the indicators that lets us know the quality of where we're at is our inner voice. Some people call that the chimp, some people call it the monkey, some people call it the little demon on your shoulder or the little angel on your shoulder. But essentially that inner voice lets us know the quality of what's going on at the level of our self-talk. But equally it might be that some people that are more feeling, they feel some sort of reaction. So we think of a time when you set out to do something and it didn't go quite the way you wanted it to. I invite you to do that. Because I remember when I wanted to be a skiing instructor. And of course, I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to be a skiing instructor. I wasn't quite sure because, there was a lot of holes of information around what was expected. And of course, if we look at attitude as a model, it's worth contemplating the definition of attitude. So the definition of an attitude is a pre-learned response to any given situation. So when we find ourselves in new situations, we tend to fall back on anything that's similar to what we're doing so that we can learn from everything that we've ever done. This explains why if I was a squash players lead with their elbow. It's more of an elbow and shoulder type action, whereas a badminton player is more wristy. And this is why sometimes if we try to play squash but we're a badminton player, we tend to use some of the old skills we learned in badminton, which don't work. So the key thing is that it's nature that what we do is we compare and contrast with where we've been. And that happens pretty regularly because we could argue that 95% of what you do today is influenced by where you've been, by the past, and also what you expect is going to happen. When you bring the past and your expectations into a situation, your attitude will come to the fore. It will speak for itself. And so I wanted to be a skiing instructor. Now the thing is, what was important to me was getting the award. And of course our values, this is where we lay out what is important to us. It was important to me to get the award so that I could then teach other people. I was a trainer in lots of other different disciplines, and this was something that really excited me. So you can hear the motivation to do that. That's the reason that I wanted to do it. But as I started to embark on the journey, fear kicked in. Now, whenever anger, sadness, fear, guilt, hurt, or anxiety present their heads, what then tends to happen is we generally have a conversation on the inside that we might not really have paid attention to, but is definitely there. And of course, when I started to embark on the instructor training, I started to believe that I couldn't do it. So what was happening at that point is the belief I was engaging was disempowering. This belief that initiated where I said, I don't think I can do this. This is now disempowering me. And at that point, especially when this is a non-adaptive pattern, and I'll explain that in more detail in a moment, when it's a non-adaptive pattern, it might very well be that we experience doubt. And this is where the internal conflicts can start to kick in. If that happens, there's a good chance that when I try to use my knowledge and skill, my access to these are going to be limited. So I literally remember not being able to link skills together, not being able to relax enough to do a foot steer or a snow plough. And these might be alien concepts to some people if you haven't skied, but these were some of the basic skills. And of course, then I had to teach them, and all of this was going on in my mind. So access to my knowledge and skill became limited. At this point, the behaviors that I'm likely to produce, they weren't helping me. So in reality, I'm producing what we would call non-adaptive behaviors. Now, why would we call them those? Because if we say they are negative behaviors, they're bad behaviors, that's a judgment call. And there's no such thing as a bad behaviour. There's either a behaviour that gets you a result or a behaviour that doesn't in the arena of performance. And of course, at this point, the results I get are what I don't want. And at that point, because we didn't achieve the goal, what happens then is we go right the way back up and our inner voice starts to take over. And what that influences is the whole picture. And the whole picture is connected to our identity. Looks a little bit messy that, but essentially the whole picture is connected to our identity. And the more we do this pattern, you get it, the more we do this, the more it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we keep embedding it. And of course, as long as this exists in our perception, it's very difficult for us to step outside of our perception or our perspective, because this is something that very few people have the capacity to do. This is why coaching was introduced. This is why we coach, to get you out of your frame of thinking. This is why someone else helping you is essential to get you on your way. Now, if we compare that to when I went back and I engaged with a different instructor, the guy called Paul out in the Allgäu, he was a very, very experienced trainer. He was a Basie trainer. And of course, he knew the subtleties of influence. So what he did was he found out where I was confident, and he built on that confidence through motivation. So just by little wins, what happened was he changed my outlook. He started to initiate a level of happiness. So I became happy on the slope. I was happy starting to challenge myself. And at this point, my beliefs started to shift to words like, I'm getting good. And of course, if I'm getting good, these beliefs then become empowering. Now, if I've got an empowering belief, the chances of there being doubt or an internal conflict, there's no doubt. The doubt disappears. And at this point, I get full access to my knowledge and my skill, whatever that is at that moment in time. But because I'm in a happy state, we can add to that. Now, of course, where Paul was brilliant was he had a way of me challenging myself to take myself further. And you know, distress only happens when control is taken away from us, when we no longer believe we're in control of our destiny. When we know we're creating our world, that's a different level of stress. And we want to be in stretch. It's really important that when you evolve as a coach or evolve as a skiing instructor or evolve even as a human being, that in your life you experience stretch, because stretch allows us to grow. So we get full access at this point. And now we're producing adaptive behaviors. How do we know they're adaptive? Because they're what we want and they're allowing us to achieve the goal. And at this point, we pass that back to our inner voice. I am now a skiing instructor. And just by that being passed back to your inner voice, the things we say to ourselves, the words we say to ourselves, they can be our greatest allies or they can be our worst enemies. And of course, what we want to do is to make this more of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So everything that we adapt to and we achieve, we're going to own on the inside. You know, when you haven't really reflected on who you are at the level of your knowledge, your skill and your attitude, when you start to believe you're lucky. Because luck doesn't come into it. We're looking at being astute at the level of what you know, at the level of your skill sets, and also how you apply yourself in that space. So people that believe that they're lucky are not really astute at this level. All of my athletes, everyone that I've ever coached in my life, I've always wanted them to be greater than me. I wanted them to excel. And of course, if they believed that they ever needed me to do that, I haven't really done my job as a coach. Because at this point, This is where it's important, when we've achieved something, that we pass that inner voice back to our identity and we start to become what I would call astute. The more astute you are, the more this starts to flow. Now, it's really interesting as a model, because if you strip it back to its basics, the difference between transition coaching and a lot of the other coaching models is that we take coaching to the next level, which sounds like a bit of a sort of a brag really, but we spent a lot of time shaping that, and I spent a lot of time analysing and validating what I've done. But great coaches know the difference between transition and transaction. So if we look at our values, we look at our beliefs, we look at our conflicts, those are all things we can't see. When we target our training and our questioning and our change on these levels, we experience transition. So I can take people out, even as a skiing instructor. I can show them how to do something on a very slow or a very light slope, maybe a blue or a green slope, which are the easier types of slopes. I can show them how to do something on that. If they're happy doing it on that, then we can progress them and we can ask them where they want to take it next, and we can take steps to do that. If, when we get on a steeper slope, they no longer have the capacity to do it, something's changed. And it's always at this level, because they haven't transitioned at the level of what they believe, their internal conflicts, or what they value. So we can change your knowledge. We can help you change your skill, and we can get you to behave in a certain way to get certain results once you've set the goal. But if you don't change here, these old patterns just simply repeat themselves. And so transition coaching is about, how do we change the emotions that hold you back? How do we change, we say how do we change them? You actually change them. But how do we help you change your emotions that hold you back? How do we help you change your beliefs? How do we help you change your conflicts that allow you to do these things effortlessly? Because when these things change effortlessly. There's no effort in that. And of course, the difference between this and this is transition, and this is transaction. So as transition coaches, before we even bother to take you in here at the level of a goal, we're more interested in what holds you back. Because if we shift this shifts automatically. So when anyone ever asks you, can you measure an attitude? You totally can. And remember, attitudes are not bad or good. They are non-adaptive or they are adaptive. And it really is important that once we've experienced something, that we review ourselves at the level of our knowledge, at the level of our skill, and at the level of our attitude, if we're going to become astute and get the most from this model. From a coaching perspective, this is manna from heaven as far as I was concerned, because what I found was that no one sets out to fail knowingly. Something happens along the way on these levels that stop them. Some people might be aware of it and some people might be less aware of it. In the military, we were taught to be solution focused. I would say it's great to be solution focused, but never at the denial of your experience. So I think it's really important that you pay attention to your experience on these levels so that you can learn from those experiences and become more astute and more confident as you go forwards. Therefore, paying attention to the finer detail that allows you to make sure that you've learned from your experience so that you can utilize it going forwards, and it doesn't just build up in your nervous system outside of your awareness and then at some point come back to hijack you. So this is a fantastic model to play with as a transition coach, and I would invite you to do that. Certainly the systems that are produced to help you change this, that's where the magic is. Those systems are magic in terms of what they can achieve. So that's attitude. And remember, it is your attitude that will determine your altitude.